I had a strange unsolved experience as a kid that has been in my mind a lot lately, and I decided this is the best place to share it. The first half of the story takes place on Halloween in 1991. For a quick bit of background, I was a 7-year-old boy at the time, and my little sister was only a few months old. I lived in Long Island, New York, on the border area of a town that kind of acted as the unspoken separation between the more affluent area and the lower income hood type area. My dad owned a bar across from the train station that was extremely popular in the 80s and was still riding the tail end of that boom. My father did very well for himself. My father and his business were well known around town. I think this may have to do with what happened. He eventually squandered everything on a heroin addiction, but that's a story for another day. And for the record, I had nothing but love and respect for him despite this. So it was Halloween. My mom was working the night shift at my dad's bar. My sister was at home with a teenage babysitter. My dad had taken me and my friend trick-or-treating. This was the first year I was able to go out at night, so I was super stoked. When we got home, there were cops in my house, the babysitter was crying, and my mom came home. Earlier, while the sitter was alone with my sister, she got a strange phone call from an unknown woman, asking to speak to little John. That was my name. The babysitter said I wasn't there, and the woman stated she had a gift for me and would call back. This woman called back a few times saying something similar, and she began to insist that she was going to come deliver her gift. Eventually, she called and sent a look in the mailbox. This is when the sitter called the police. The police found a pirate skull Halloween decoration that would talk and shake when you clapped, as well as several candy bars. My whole family was really bugged out about this. I was scared, but I also kind of liked the skull thing, and convinced my parents after much protest to let me keep it. My parents for a few weeks after that were on edge, and hated the toy. They tried to work with the police, but there wasn't much they could do about it, and the whole thing kind of went cold. Fast forward to the following summer in 1992. My best friend and I decided to have a car wash in front of his house, which was diagonally across the road from my house. We had out buckets, soap, a hose, and a sign. You get the picture. All of a sudden, this black car rolls up. It was an old 80s Crown Vic or something that looked like that. One of those big cars that steers like a boat. It then rolls down the window, and there's a woman sitting in the driver's seat. She has short white hair, and kind of had this whole Ursula vibe going. I told my parents she was old because of her hair, but now looking back on it, she could have been as young as her 40s. She says, "Hi, John, do you know who I am?" I said no. She goes on, "I'm the one who gave you those nice presents on Halloween." My jaw drops and I just freeze up staring. Then, like something out of a movie, she begins to laugh manically and then speeds off. I ran home and told my parents. That was the end of it, and they never figured out who it was. My father had speculated that this person may have believed he was wealthy, and maybe was trying to get ransom. Maybe she was a scorned ex-lover. I don't know, I've speculated many things, but I will likely never know the truth. And at this point, as I'm now 35, that was a lifetime ago. But one thing still keeps me up at night, and that's wondering if she'll ever come back. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out the candy to trick-or-treaters who came by. This really bummed out my brother and I because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating ourselves earlier with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating, and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house to hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating themselves. So that left me home alone with my little brother, handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 11 p.m., almost all the candy was gone. My brother and I then decided we'd eat the rest, and we were sitting on the couch watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, when there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could be knocking on our door this late. I assumed it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters, but even if this was the case, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or that we weren't home, so I assumed it was then my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the peephole and saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way this guy was a trick-or-treater, because he wasn't wearing a costume and was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin, like sickly thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about the guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open the door, in any universe. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door, and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling like he was. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're all out of candy," I shouted to him. I watched as his smile then spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you home alone in there?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man then let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there, are you?" I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket, and he was still shaking a bit. I began to then wonder if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get the hell away from my house or I'm going to call the cops," I shouted. His smile faded and he bared his teeth. His teeth were stained yellow. I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't messing around with them. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole, though, until I saw him completely off of our property. My brother and I then breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the cops. But we were then a bit paranoid after this, and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man, since he hadn't really tried to harm us. Now when we think about it, I wish I would have called the cops because maybe we would have been able to save someone's life. You see, the next day we found out that an elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been stabbed. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, and she'd been stabbed multiple times. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. Unfortunately, they couldn't do much with the information we'd given them, since we hadn't got a clear look at his face. They then went on the hunt for the man but never ended up catching him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's death, because I could have prevented it by just calling the cops. But I think that the most disturbing thing of all of this was the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have easily gone in and taken whatever he wanted since the door was wide open. This means he only had one intention, and it wasn't good. He didn't want money or jewelry. He only had one urge on his mind. And I'm just so thankful it didn't end up happening to me. Halloween has, unfortunately, never been a big deal out here in Scotland, and that's always bummed me out because I love Halloween. But after this year, I think I'll be happy never celebrating it again. My street and the next one over have a lot of young kids who go out trick-or-treating during Halloween. So one day during Halloween, I was out shopping all day with my mom, and we decided to pick up some sweets just in case anyone came to our door. I had plans to go to the cinema to see a movie with my boyfriend, so when I got home I was getting myself ready to do so, and my mom was busy putting away the shopping, so when the first load of kids came to the door, I was the one who had to answer it. There were children from our street the next one over, and some I couldn't even recognize, as well as an adult at the end of the path. I guessed it was maybe a father or an older brother by their size, and they were dressed in all black and had some sort of mask covering their face, but it wasn't anything I recognized from a movie or anything. Anyway, they all told me some jokes and I gave them their treats, and they made their way back down the path and onto the next house. I was about to close the door when I noticed that the guy with the kids was still standing there at the end of my path. He hadn't noticed, and he wasn't watching the children either. He was just looking right at me, and my skin started to crawl when I realized that he was just staring at me. I backed up slowly into the house and watched him as he raised his hand and waved at me very slowly. I was about to call out to him when my mom came to the door to make sure I was alright. Just then he took off in the opposite direction, right away from the children. He hadn't been there with them at all, and he left as soon as he realized that I wasn't home alone. I was completely freaked out and told my boyfriend all about it when he came to pick me up from my house. but I quickly forgot all about it while we were watching the movie. When I finally got home, it was getting really late and trick-or-treating was well and truly over at this point. I got inside and I saw my mom getting ready to take the dogs out for a walk so they could do the last-minute business, and they would then meet up with my dad on his way home from work. So I was going to be home alone. But after my horrible encounter, I don't really like being home alone. But it's much worse on Halloween, and it always has been. Anyway, I was home alone and grabbed some snacks and went up to my bedroom and onto my computer so I could do some of my writing, scroll through Tumblr, and listen to some music. After my first creepy encounter with the guys coming into my house and onto my backyard, my dad bought a motion sensor relay and attached it to the wall of our house right outside my window. Normally, it would go off whenever a cat walks alongside our fence, but it would usually go off after a couple of minutes. I always know when the light has come on because it lights up my whole room given where it's placed. And while I was sitting at my computer, the light came on. I ignored it at first because I knew that it would go off soon, but 5 minutes passed and it still hadn't gone off. So I opened my blinds to have a look outside and see what was going on. My stomach almost fell to the ground when I looked out the window and saw the same creep from hours before sitting on the fence, waving at my window to keep the light on. His waving slowed down suddenly when he spotted me, and then he was all serious and creepy again. I didn't know what to do. I just got flashbacks from before. Luckily, I heard the front door open and my parents were coming into the house with the dogs, so I rushed down the stairs and started screaming at them, telling them about the guy on the fence. My dad never questioned me. He just took the dogs and rushed through the house, threw the back door open, and ran outside screaming aggressively at the man. He managed to scare the man off, but I convinced him not to call the police because I didn't want to relive the whole thing again. All I wanted to do was just go to sleep and forget about the entire incident. And lucky for me, that was the last time I ever saw that creep.